عم بمزح معه قلت له let's film an episode. I'm breaking the fourth wall. عم بمزح معه قلت له let's film an episode. And he's like يلا. So he caught me by surprise. And then he's like, you're the host. So first of all, I will confiscate the question pad if I'm the host. Thank you.
Fine.
Ronnie, the last time you and I sat on this table together, you also caught me by surprise 2 hours before a flight, and you said that you would want the episode to be my last words in case, you know, a flight crashes and I die. So that was super helpful, by the way. Thank you. And
neither one was true.
No, it was true. It wasn't. Wait,
no, it wasn't your final words, and you stayed alive. So
which one is worse?
It's raining today, so maybe
it is raining.
Yeah,
it is.
Last
That's
words.
very relevant to the conversation.
Dangerous.
So it was the end of May, and it was looking very different back then in terms of, you know, in terms of the regional war. Iran and Hezbollah were still kind of on the offensive. They were able to manage the pace, to set the pace for the events, and it felt like this would end very badly for us with a Hezbollah pseudo victory, and it would end very badly for us here. And the concern was not that an all-out war would come, it was that an all-out war or an all-out sort of victory for Iran in the region would come, and that would even tighten our margins even more and more and more. And I remember thinking naively enough, because it was not based on any evidence, that it could not end that way because it was not sustainable. And I remember we brought up October 17, and I remember I said, even if it takes 5 more attempts at another version of October 17, eventually we're going to learn how to crack the code and succeed, but that it couldn't end that way. So how would you say it has ended since then?
What changed is that the Israelis led a full-out assault on Hezbollah in most of the battlefield area. Clearly not the entire country. There's still a militia. There's still an armed group called Hezbollah, much smaller. But none of this was done internally. Lebanon had no input in anything that happened, especially from September, so a few weeks after we spoke, until today, in the last half year or so. Lebanese agency has been absolutely irrelevant to de facto circumstances, meaning that the president, the prime minister, the new government, everything you've seen happening locally could not have happened had Hezbollah remained as it was. The Israelis changed circumstance. You can also add to that the Israelis have absolutely no curiosity or interest or inkling for a functional, vibrant Lebanon. That's not on their radar. On their radar, they don't want a Hezbollah that can fight them. So for that reason, you still have a group called Hezbollah that is armed in this country that can still agitate and cause problems. Just a few days ago on the Syrian border, and there could be even instability to come, but Lebanese had nothing to do with this. And I'll add to that, what shows, I think, more and more is that half a year later, the Lebanese government cannot take bold stances against the disarmament of Hezbollah. The government is actually shy to even address it head on. Ministers have more or less come out saying that there's legitimacy to this group as it exists in its armed capacity. And the Israelis, with their 5 points that they still hold in the south, that cannot be the justification for another Iranian proxy reestablished in Lebanon. Yet, the discourse is more or less the same. So, I think Lebanon has done absolutely nothing. What has happened is that the Israelis bombed Hezbollah. They degraded Hezbollah. They killed Hassan Nasrallah, which was unthinkable the last time we spoke. They decimated the communications network of that group. This is after we spoke. They killed the entire command structure. They left very little important ammunition. And the stuff that remained, they bombed it in the south anyway. And they leveled villages. They destroyed the infrastructure that could hurt Israel. That's the story, not Lebanon.
So when you mentioned ministers that still feel that they can justify Hezbollah's, clearly let's talk about the new hero for the pro-Mumena axis, and Minister Tamara is the Minister of Environment.
I don't know if she's the new hero for the resistance axis. That might be too much. I don't know.
At least in terms of cabinet, she's the best spoken, best performing character. Personally, I would give her credit. She has has very commanding presence, and she knows how to deliver her ideas without going overboard as her, previous friends would. But so there's clearly 3 lines within cabinet today. There's the Tamara Zain line. There's the Minister of Justice and Uwait line, who say we need to put a certain calendar right now. And then there's the, I don't know how to describe it. Is it more diplomatic? Is it less eager? Is it
eager?
Is it less eager, for example, to bring up the subject of Hezbollah, or is it just tackling it from more diplomacy? But it's the Tariq Mitri, for example, statement, who said, this is realistically, he's saying realistically we still don't have this on the agenda. He gave a realistic answer. I don't think it was an opinion. I think it was an answer, or an assessment. Ever since, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I do think he did come out to clarify his position about the topic, and he said he was in favor in putting this within the pipeline.
He went from extremely caution to caution, but he did not say anything bold or assertive.
So we have caution, we have very assertive, which is Kataib and Uwait, and then we have Tamara Zain, who is very smart in the way that she wants to buy time and push this conversation down the line and try to find justifications, but without being over provocative. So are you happy with where the middle ground rests today in between these 2 extreme positions?
I wouldn't frame it this way. I don't think these are extreme positions. It's either you stick to the status quo or you break free. I don't think these are extreme positions. What the Lebanese Forces Foreign Minister is calling for, to me, is not an extreme position. That's implementation of Security Council resolutions.
No, but correct. I'm not saying it's an extreme position. I'm saying it's the most extreme versus the most extreme on what could be positions right now, which is let's pipeline it right now, or let's wait some time. These are the 2 opposite.
I wouldn't frame them as extreme. I think Tamara Zain, if I understood her right, is a reflection of status quo permanency. Keep an armed group called Hezbollah until the region looks fundamentally different. And that could never happen. There could always be a justification for an armed group in that kind of discourse, whether she says it or other people. So she to me represents the status quo. And then you have other people that are maybe on a spectrum of whether or not they think this is a priority. And the reason I mentioned Lebanese foreign minister up front is because he inherited an important portfolio, one that the former foreign minister had absolutely little to no role in terms of asserting Lebanon's position. His was more hands-off. So that is a remarkable improvement in the messaging. But I wouldn't frame that as it's not that this is the opposite end of the spectrum. On the contrary, that's in line with international resolutions. In between, I think you have a variety of voices that probably on a veer more to the status quo, whether deliberately or not. And I would even put Tariq Mitri in this camp, meaning they're not capable of doing more.
Why do you think?
Well, that to me is Lebanon pre-2024. In other words, if you want to disarm Hezbollah locally, you're looking for a civil war. That's their defense line. So this is not a Lebanese...
Do you agree that if you want to disarm Hezbollah locally, it is going to lead eventually
to civil war? I'll do it in reverse. Okay. That's their messaging, which is you can't do anything about it, so don't say more about it. Tariq Mitri, I think, lives in that space. That's why he's always cautious about how he frames it. I would put Nawaf Slam in this category too. Somebody who has no interest in provocation or confrontation with that group, and I don't think he wants it to identify his career. And then everything else in the middle, from people that have no say in it, like an education minister, to an environmental minister like Tamara Zain, who have no role to play in security, yet they seem to more or less fall back in. There's always going to be some legitimacy for an armed group like Hezbollah. I think that's why, going back to the earlier point, nothing Lebanese has changed. So now to answer your question, yes, a local confrontation with an Iranian-backed militia would be worse than civil war. It would be anarchy and societal fragmentation, and it's unthinkable that the Lebanese army go after Hezbollah. So I can't imagine that happening. So I don't think they're wrong in that the Lebanese cannot do more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're wrong. But the truth is, very few are actually trying to find a way so that the international community, the way it's set up, this enforcement mechanism, the way we live today, under a police state of sorts, monitored by the Israelis, the Americans, and the French, this understanding that Hezbollah cannot reconfigure itself the way it once did, that's not a permanent solution. You want to find a permanent solution that's good for Lebanon, not good for Israel. Very few ministers, I think you identified them already, are speaking that language.
So the understanding you're reaching is that it's true. So several things can be true at once. It is true that the Lebanese state going after Hezbollah through the Lebanese army will spark something of a war, let's say. You and the position of Nawaf Salam are in agreement that the state going after Hezbollah through the Lebanese army is not a possible avenue to chase, because that will lead to war. We also agree that the issue of disarmament we need to keep the momentum behind it, because even though the balance of power has completely changed, there's nothing to guarantee that it can't change back over time, even just enough to become a serious obstacle. So you say that this is an international, trying to find a resolution for Lebanon is an international responsibility and not only a local one. Is the question of disarmament still really valid today, or is it about how do we prevent a rearmament? So does Hezbollah still maintain enough weapons to classify as a serious threat?
The seriousness may not be visible right now because this group has been dealt a heavy blow and politics re-emerged fast. Positions were filled quickly and we moved on from the war. There's
positions within Hezbollah, you mean? Or
No. Within the state.
Okay.
And they're being filled, those that are empty. And you also have a focus on post-ceasefire economics today. The discussion has moved on. So in that sense, the focus on Hezbollah has diminished. But that could just be a feeling of false comfort. And the reason I say this is this has happened before. The Israelis laid siege to Beirut in the summer of 1982. The Israelis removed Arafat from Lebanon. Over 10,000 Lebanese were killed in that summer. Arafat was kicked out of Lebanon. And the ensuing events too. You have Bashir Jmail is killed, Sabran Shatila. Things looked very bad in the summer of 1982. And then, 1983, the war was over. There was a new government. There were international peacekeepers across the country, even in Beirut, marching in Beirut, patrolling the streets. You had a Lebanese army that was being reconfigured and reclaiming lost geography. The Lebanese army was more or less disbanded at the beginning of the civil war. It was coming back together. You had also UNIFIL in the south. You had the Israelis withdrawing, leaving Beirut. You also had something that's become toxic to talk about because of its implications. But the Lebanese government, with American support and Israelis on the other side, signed a trilateral agreement, a May 17 agreement with Israel. All of that happened months after an Israeli siege and war. 1983, people were talking about the end of the civil war, turning the page, moving on. And then 1984, all of that was meaningless. That's an extreme case scenario, one that I don't think will play out exactly the same way right now, but the threat is there. If you do not resolve what could lead to another sub-state group re-emerging, or Hezbollah's rearmament, or Hezbollah's current status quo as it exists, if you do not remove that threat from Lebanon, if you don't let Lebanon become a normal country, you will always have the potential for things to fall apart again. So that's really my point, in that there's no resolution as of yet that's been articulated on how to sever Iran from Lebanon.
Let's go there. So as we're speaking, Trump has vowed that the Houthis are going to meet their end. He's intensifying attacks on the Houthis in Yemen. So for those who don't know, after the capitulation of Hezbollah, Yemen became probably the last of Iran's proxy that has enough of strategic depth so they can threaten interest in neighboring Gulf countries that are backed by the US. They can simultaneously obstruct shipping in one of the vital lanes, and they can fly drones 1,600 miles into Israel. So it was the last well-positioned geographically proxy that can do all of those things. So perhaps had things frozen down right after Hezbollah's defeat, perhaps the Houthis could have inherited the role of Hezbollah on a regional level. Now Trump is going after the last of Iran's proxy with meaningful, threatening power projection. And
Houthis never really had a regional dimension. Houthis were never able to steer influence in any of these countries. No. Hezbollah was the regional arm. Houthis are a proxy, but they're one that I don't think ever will matter as much as Hezbollah does to Iran, even when they can cause trouble.
But I think in terms of just geography, the militias in Iraq cannot cause that much trouble as the Houthis. They cannot, shipping really slowed down in the strait. Insurance policies for the ships went really up. A lot of companies halted their travel, their navigation in the strait. So because of their geography and because of the geography of Yemen as well, which is they occupy a large space of Yemen with a lot of natural resources and mountains and hills. So they have some sort of natural defense. It makes them valuable even if they don't have a regional role, but they can strike multiple targets and threaten multiple interests, global or regional or Israeli and American. So let's say Trump is serious about his threats or promises. The Houthis are gone. Hezbollah is gone. Assad has fallen. The war is restarting in Gaza, and it does not seem that this will end with another political resolution. I think now Netanyahu feels he has the momentum to really not be held back in terms of military force and trying to depopulate, because he's using language that is very abstract. He said, we want to make sure Gaza is never a threat again. What does that mean? Is it empty of people, hence why it's no longer a threat? How do you differentiate Hamas from non-Hamas? At this point, everyone in Gaza in his mind is Hamas. So when he says, we want to make sure Gaza is not a threat, it means that there's no one in Gaza. So let's say all of that is gone, and there's momentum on the rise in Iraq for the militias to disarm. So what if Iran no longer sees any incentive in trying to rebuild what it has lost, because what it has lost is beyond rebuilding? And maybe this is what ultimately severs, because maybe Hezbollah, like a very weak Hezbollah on its own, that's isolated and besieged by the Syrians from one end and the Israelis, maybe it's not worth Iran putting up all this effort to maintain anymore. So maybe one
could go to the last stretch and think that this is a reality that could play out long term. The Iranian regime is not sustainable. It could well lose, including everything you said.
It has already lost in terms of everything that's outside of its natural borders.
No, Hezbollah is still there. Thinking it's gone is misreading it too. And the reason I went back to the original analogy is because in 1984, no one assumed that a few thousand Iranian trainees and a few thousand Lebanese militiamen could become one day the most heavily armed terrorist group and one of the most world. Yes, and a regional war machine that could delay history for the region, that could destroy Lebanon, could destroy Syria, could fight a war with Israel twice. Of course, the second round it loses both, but the second round today it really got hurt, but could put up a good fight. You can't imagine that in 1984. That's my point, is that this is all perhaps where things end for Iran, but one cannot hope that this happens anytime soon and bet on that as policy. You have to make sure that Lebanon doesn't have this problem for Lebanon to work. I'm not so interested in the fate of Iran in the region. I'm mostly interested in the fate of Iran in Lebanon. Unfortunately, those two scenarios are the same for Iran. That's why they're still up until now, interested in preserving it. Otherwise, this should be something you can easily let go of.
So, okay, let's. I want to go to the phrase where you said Hezbollah is still there for Iran. So, what was Hezbollah serving Iran to before this war? So they had deterrence. So it was a line of defense, and it was also power projection. So it was a forward base. Today, it serves neither of those roles, and it can't also assist regionally anymore. So it can't go train the Houthis in Yemen or sustain Bashar. So it feels like Hezbollah lost all of the value it had for Iran. And now what preserving Hezbollah is preserving the opportunity to perhaps rebuild some of it later.
Yeah.
But Hezbollah as it is today no longer has anything to offer to Iran.
I agree with you. It's preserving the opportunity which we cannot afford. I agree with you. That's where I worry that people that are just too cautious to approach this right now or think it's not there. I would extend this to the Prime Minister, that they don't want this to bog down their mandate. I worry that we'll look back and say they had opportunities to be more assertive. I think the President, up until now, is more bold in that direction, but I don't know as well how far he can go. And that includes how far the Lebanese army can go too, without causing problems locally.
What do you think are some...
But you want a scenario.
Yes.
You want the goal to be that the Lebanese army can inherit Hezbollah's weapons. You want it to be done peacefully, and there has to be a transfer and a transition from that militia to pure politics only. You want that to be the framework.
I from what I know, the Lebanese army is not allowed to actually inherit the weapons. They are being forced to destroy the stockpiles. So I don't know if you talk about inherit. I mean, actually integrate the weapons into their armada.
I mean
inherit the role.
Inherit the security dominion of that group.
How do you imagine? Like, can you give us 2 or 3 hypothetical pathways for to convince Iran to let go of Hezbollah that are not directly through force?
Yeah, we're lucky. We have a very, very peace-oriented, peace goal president in the White House, Donald Trump, who seems to want the Nobel Peace Prize. Every statement from his posts, there's peace.
He also wants Canada as a 51st state.
Yeah, and sure. And every time he talks to Zelensky or scolds Zelensky, the issue is peace. That everyone seems to not understand Trump's intentions. He wants peace. Fine. For me, that means he just wants the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't think peace is the goal. It's being awarded for peace on Trump's terms. That to me is an opportunity. If you're working within an administration that is short-lived, one term, goal-oriented, deal-making, and I think his patience with Netanyahu and co is short-term too. I think he will probably want to be presiding over a huge Arab-Israeli peace summit, and probably an U.S.-Iranian de facto reconciliation summit. And I can imagine a Iranian embassy reopening in Washington and vice versa.
Does that necessarily need to come with Iran letting go of Hezbollah, or could Iran secure that?
That's exactly my point, is that Lebanon now has to make the case. If they don't make the case, you could end up with a Lebanon that's locked in at this level, which is problematic. And this allows for the opportunities you mentioned earlier to resurface later. You want Lebanon to make the case now. And in this grand bargaining with deal-making Donald Trump, you want Lebanon's voice to be heard. Lebanon's voice, to me, at the moment, is what the Lebanese foreign minister is saying. I subscribe to the way he articulates the issue. That has to be a government policy. It can't just be one minister. It can't just be a few parties. It has to be the government and led by the prime minister making this their mission. Nawaf Salam is not this man. Hence, we have a local dilemma. Hence, you have ministers that are more comfortable legitimizing or re-legitimizing Hezbollah's weapons. And that to me is a worrying sign.
You think the Lebanese voices around Trump are some sort of guarantee that Lebanon never gets locked in. So he just recently appointed a Lebanese a ambassador to Lebanon that is Lebanese. Mas'ad Boulos is famously his Middle East. Do you think these people can carry the message for Lebanon even if the Lebanese government doesn't?
No.
Why so?
An American ambassador to Lebanon is America's interests in Lebanon, whether he's originally Lebanese or not. And as far as I've seen, Michel Issa is not exactly the most articulate politician anyway when it comes to Lebanon. He's
not experienced.
I don't think one should not hold that against him either. But that's not going to be the savior of Lebanon. No, it's not Michel Issa. Mas'ad Boulos, from what I understand, is a personal advisor to Donald Trump. You can have personal advisors. You can have personal friends. You can have Lebanese in the Oval Office. You can have in-laws married to your daughter, etc. No, that doesn't guarantee anything. Lebanese state is the voice for Lebanon. That's why in the last 20 years, the Lebanese state was not doing its job. It was being the voice for other countries, primarily Iran. Now you have an opportunity to be a Lebanese voice within the country, and the state has to be the vehicle. It never works otherwise.
There's a phrase in Arabic, and I will try to translate it, but it's a saying, إنه توزيع أدوار, which is distribution of roles. Do you think there's some sort of unspoken agreement between ministers and the prime minister that one of us is going to pull harder and one of us is going to be softer in order to get what we want, but while reconciling the relationship with Lebanon's Shia component? Because I do feel like Nawaf Salam is worried about how Lebanon reconciles with the Shia later on, because they feel, as a community and not just Hezbollah, they feel betrayed and they feel besieged and they feel really weak. Do you think Nawaf has taken a strategic decision, an active decision, not to over-antagonize the Shia and let other factions perhaps do that publicly, and he could carry the message in a softer tone elsewhere, behind closed doors maybe?
No, I think that assumes too much of his political curiosity. No, I think he's not interested in that, in security affairs. Nawaf Salam, from what I understand, is very articulate in technicality and is better at talking about sectarianism and civil marriage, but not about how to bring Lebanese sovereign security back to the south without confrontation. I don't think he's there. This is my reading of him. I'm not saying that he's avoiding the subject entirely, but I have not heard anything from him that says that he wants this to be his mission.
I want to talk to you about Nawaf Salam.
But let me ask you, do you feel the same way?
I have wishful thinking that this is what's going on.
I would say the reverse about Joseph Aoun. He may say things that impress on this issue, but also not be able to do much too. That may be equally problematic. But he's articulating it more. And clearly, and I'll quote a guest on the podcast, Michael Young, who framed this dilemma. He said that this is a scenario, or almost like a play, that Joseph Aoun is the lead character.
Yes.
And that is true, but the lead character may not have the most authority.
No.
The authority comes from the state and all of its components. They have to line up with the region and the international community for this to work.
Okay, two things. We talk about the state as if it's some monolithic body that is all in agreement with itself. But if we look at the state, it's, let's say, cabinets, okay? Is the current government as cohesive, do you think, as it should have been? Is it okay to have, I don't even want to say nuance because it's a passive term. Is it okay to have some sort of conflicting message between the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Environment Minister? Is it okay that we have this sort of spectrum on such serious positions, or should we have produced a much more cohesive government that perhaps excludes?
I don't mind ministers saying what they believe and then having reality move in a different direction. I don't care if certain ministers feel a certain way. That's not where things are moving to. I don't care about how they express themselves. What I care about is that the Prime Minister and the President and the Army and all levers of security agree that this problem is not over and it has to be resolved peacefully. That to me is the message. I don't care if Tarimitri is too bold or not.
I want to try to get a clear definition of what is the state. So is it the prime minister and the president and the security apparatus of the foreign minister? Like how many positions does the state include in this context?
The political mandate, and however that translates, whether it's a majority government or whether it's the security components all lock in step. And clearly it has to include the prime minister and the president to agree on this. Ideally, the speaker of parliament would also be in that camp, and I don't think that will happen. So you have to work around that. Because the speaker of parliament up until now is not interested in distancing himself too much from that. Even when he's in a position to do so today, I'm worried that if he's not seeing his position as certain, it means there is real risk. Otherwise, you would have more confident...
Can you clarify that? I'm نحكي عن نبيه بري. You feel like...
I'm نحكي عن people that seem to survive under bad circumstances, and they survive that way. Jamblat is another voice. Birri is another voice too. These are people that seem to wither storms.
But do you think it's possible for them at this point to try to imagine a future that they know they're not going to be a part of anymore? What is the incentive for Nabih Birri or Walid Jamblat at the end of their lives to pull this major switch?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say anything more to whether or not they're personally not interested too, but I don't think you've seen enough momentum from major parties to completely move on.
Okay.
But so, again, I'll say something. It's only a few months.
Since
it's March. Maybe in June things will be clearer. But what I don't want to see is the potential.
Lost.
The potential to swing back.
Yes.
1983, Wardini, 1983, George, 1983. Downtown was being reconstructed.
They thought it was over.
You wouldn't put bulldozers to clear up the rubble unless you thought it's over. That's one sign. The economy was beginning to recover.
It's interesting because when we look back at the
Hezbollah
war now,
Hezbollah had not bombed the embassies, had not bombed the Marine barracks. Hezbollah was still small. It can quickly turn into something else. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I'm just going to make an interesting observation. When we look at history, you always see it in retrospect. We look at the war, we know it's 15 years. But for the people who lived through the war, they never knew it was going to be 15 years. Could have been 2, 1, or 30. You never know. So maybe we are, So, okay, I want to go back to Joseph Aoun and Nawaf Salam. Personally, my attention is on 2026. The upcoming parliamentary elections, and I love that you're really holding your face, trying to take me seriously right now as I say this, because
it just means more.
If we were
more social media for you
offline, Ronnie would be just would be bullying me right now.
Report account. report.
Refuse collab.
Refuse. Yeah, that's
decline. No, you're gonna accept collab for this one. The fridge agrees.
Yeah, the fridge. No, the fridge is not accepting.
So, the way I see it, the elections could play out in different directions. But for the reform-minded project to stay viable, Joseph Aoun and Nawaf Salam need to build a political brand that can serve as a foundation of a coalition, parliamentary coalition. The reason why I say that is because there's a serious concern that they might fail. Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun, they might fail. Now, when we say fail, we really need to define the threshold of what succeed is, what fail is.
Success is.
What? Yes, but then I would have to say failure.
Yeah.
No.
I was giving you a way to fix both.
So what failure means, or what success could look like, because there are different ways to define success within a 1 year. Is it the advances that they can make in terms of security in the south, and the deployment of the Lebanese army, is that, for example, the primary measure? Is it at being able to pass systemic reforms? Is that a measure? Is it about being able to organize democratic processes? Is that the measure of success? Can they work together? Or are there disagreements between them that perhaps haven't surfaced to the public yet?
I measure success on what we've been talking about. If they find resolution that is peaceful and assertive, they'll be successful. And Lebanon will be too. If they dance around this issue and focus on limited economic recovery, or they get sucked into the banking restructuring debate, which is happening, and if they get locked into things that do not address this wider problem, I think success will be relative looking back. The government will not survive. The state will not too. I am applying a worst case scenario. What I want success to be is how the war ended last year, for it to be the last war. I don't trust the Israelis to be a drone police force chasing trucks. I don't trust the Americans for their attention span too. It's the same country that can also give up on Lebanon and abandon it.
The way they did it with Afghanistan.
Or the way they did it with Lebanon.
Yeah.
Lebanon was under Syrian occupation for 15 years after the civil war
with
ended.
their approval.
Why go through that again and
Syria
again and
also
again?
entered Lebanon with their approval.
And Lebanon entered Syria through Hezbollah with their approval too. So I don't want any of that to happen. What I want is an end. That to me will be the measure of success.
Okay.
That'll be the name of this episode too.
The mother of... So, okay.
But I mean that. You could see the lira recover a bit. You can see a new central bank vice governor. You can see, we already have a new Lebanese army commander. You can see positions filled.
I remember one thing though, which was very interesting. I was sitting at a coffee shop in Jbeil, thinkers. You jokingly call it thoughtless. So I was sitting at thinkers, and I just get a push notification that there's a new army general, and I look ahead and I literally see a man hanging up his poster on a building as if they already knew he was gonna get. It's crazy. But the notification comes with a printed poster simultaneously.
You can have positions filled with problematic people too, assuming that brings some stability, and that's a bargaining chip with Birri. That's happened already.
Can we talk about this?
But hold on.
Yes, but let's go back to this when you're done.
But even the finance minister was a bargain with Birri. That can be defined as success now, that, we've avoided a confrontation. No. Success is confrontation through peaceful measure and ending the security problem and ending political paralysis, putting it all behind us so that every party can function.
But hasn't political paralysis already ended de facto?
So the finance minister is a clear indication that there's part of it. It's not over. There's something there. But
it's also not what we used to know.
It's different. It's less.
Significantly less.
In many ways, yes. That's why I keep saying 1983. Look, Bashir Jmayed's brother. This is not an anti-Bashir president. It's his DNA. Amin Jmayed became president. Look how his career ended with Syrians entering Bahabta. I think the story should be letting go of any comfort, and that this problem will just go away or be dealt with. No, Lebanon has to make the case for Lebanon to work. What I don't want is to see the end result of this is just the Lebanese forces being extreme. I've heard reasonable people already condemn the Lebanese foreign minister for sounding a bit too civil war-like, talking about his childhood on the Green Line. No, they're missing the point. He's articulating Lebanon's sovereign position today, 45 years later, as a foreign minister. It's not the Lebanese forces position. That's Lebanon right there. We should be aiding that.
On the issue of bargaining with Birri, we published a piece, and it says basically the title is why you may notice that your social media feed is turning subtly against Nawaf Salam and Joseph Hon. And the argument we present is that the relative success of Joseph Aoun and Nawaf Salam is in no one's interest outside of their own. And let me try to break it down for you here. Of course, Hezbollah wants a failed Lebanese state so that they can reinforce the narrative that we do need to depend on ourselves.
No, they don't want a failed Lebanese state. No, they want a paralyzed Lebanese state that bends to their concerns.
Okay.
That's the dream that they've lived with. They don't want it to fail. They want it to function on their terms.
Of course. Yeah. So let's assume that the measure of success is the state succeeding in asserting security and sovereignty. If that's the measure of success, then Hezbollah wants them to fail in doing that.
Wants them to not be able to claim.
But not entirely collapse as that there's chaos, that there's no cover for them. Okay, I agree. But okay, so let me refine that phrase. I think that they wouldn't like to see the brand of Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun succeed as a political foundation for in terms of bringing in a new rules of power making in the country. Neither does any of the heads of the major political parties. I don't like to use the word the political class because it's such a overused and loosely used word, but let's use it here just for...
You're not megaphone.
Yeah, but I mean, they've covered enough of it.
No, I'm saying is that doesn't mean anything. Political class.
It doesn't mean anything, but let's use it the way you and I know how to use it, which is the club of 5 major political parties that represents the 3 major sects in the country plus the Druze. So I feel I have the instinct that none of these heads, in terms of Gibran Bassil or Samir Jaja in the Christian constituency, in terms of Hariri or Mi'ate, or whoever is equivalent in the Sunni constituency, or Jumblat, or for that matter, of course, the Shia. All of these parties kind of start becoming obsolete or lose their exclusivity when the problem goes away, or when the chef d'orchestre, the maestro of the orchestra, which was Hezbollah, goes away. So I do feel that there's going to be an unspoken alliance forming against Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun, and you might see it shrink or expand as the need dictates, and you might see it be more subtle in some expressions than others. But it is really in no one's interest for them to fully succeed. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I think it's already started.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. They will measure their support for Nawaf Salam. They can't do much about Joseph Aoun. Joseph Aoun is a bit
harder to punch at.
Not just that, they have to deal with him for a long period of time. Nawaf Salam, in their mind, could be disposable. So working with Nawaf Salam could also mean that Nawaf Salam sees an opportunity to come back as prime minister with less confrontation. So I completely agree. But they're going to do this not through politics.
Through media?
No.
Through what?
What they're doing already.
Which is?
Sending people to protest or support the Lebanese army, depending on what the interest is. Sending fighters to the border and capturing Syrian soldiers. Perhaps even turbulence in Syria.
But that's only within Hezbollah's realm. How do you think parties outside of Hezbollah could try to undermine or confine or contain?
Oh, I see what you're saying. That becomes, I think, a little more nuanced. The president seems to be unpopular among all Christian parties.
Yes.
So that could be a problem.
The 2 major ones, at least, which is
yeah. And it doesn't mean that they don't support him when they need to, but clearly there's a new
competitor.
There's something that they don't have complete control over.
Yes.
That's a political problem. But so far, the absence of Gibran Bassil and the working alongside Lebanese forces seems to be working. It may not be a complete marriage of...
Do you think it will only work as long as the Lebanese forces need it to work? So the way I see it, and I know some of my Lebanese forces friends are going to be upset at me for saying this, but I'm just going to come out and say it anyway. I think the way they have 4 ministers in government, right? If the government succeeds, they can say, okay, the government succeeded, and guess what? We've been the most advanced voice within it, so we can take a lot of credit for nudging it in the right direction. But if it fails, they can build a counter campaign that is, okay, well, change ever since 2019 tried. And guess what? You pushed us to Nawaf successfully. We went with Nawaf. The international momentum pushed us to Joseph Aoun, even though we were pro-Joseph Aoun in 2023, but no longer so much as much in 2025. So we accepted your terms, we gave you a fair shot, and you didn't succeed. So now everybody needs to give us the chance. Let this be the final gamble. And the way I see it, that is that Uwait could potentially play at securing 2 or 3 Shia positions in the parliamentary elections in terms of supporting Shia opposition candidates. They could also potentially play at getting their allies, their Sunni allies, re-elected in terms of Fuad Makhzoumi or Ashraf Rifi, or maybe even a couple of new names. And they could, in some way, push their preferred candidates to the position of Prime Minister and House Speaker in the next cycle, if they can succeed in getting 25, let's say, Uwait MPs, and then rally more support. So I think the Uwait can play a game of total takeover Uwait and allies. And for that to happen, they need everything else to fail.
But is there a question there, or is that just a...
I'm offering my not assessment, but maybe projection.
There's a political defeat
it's
that
speculation.
the Free Patriotic movement has not recovered from, and they're less significant today, and they're becoming less significant.
But things can change in a year.
Things can change, and as of right now, it seems to be working against them more. The current configuration is working. And the Lebanese forces didn't just beat them in the elections. I think they will beat them again, and even probably by a longer shot in 2026. So politically, Lebanese forces are a bigger player right now. But I agree with you in that everything can fall apart. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's a Gibran Bassil minister or Lebanese forces minister or the presidents or the prime ministers or Birris or whoever change. You can have Tamara Zen, you can have Nasser Yassin. They can both occupy the same portfolio. The story for me is far less that. It's more that Lebanon is still an abnormal state. It's not a normal state. It doesn't claim authority the way other countries do. I don't care at the end of the day whether it's Nawaf Slim or someone else later, someone more impressive, less impressive. That's not the story. The story for me is getting to a place that Lebanon can govern itself independently, without any support, without enemy intrusion. I do not see that yet. I would love to talk to somebody who lived here in 1983, how they saw things, and if there's more parallels than I assume. But I think there's a lot there.
Do you think we can widen the scope a little bit of what we expect as an ideal outcome to include more than just Lebanon reclaiming its governability, but it's also preventing a really toxic 50-year-old system from reinventing itself? What if we can play at more than just security?
What is 50?
50-year-old system in terms of even pre-civil war. So it's the kind of the political culture or the political group class that has really been has held a hold on power for almost 3 generations now successively. So we have Kamal Jumblat, Walid Jumblat, and Taymour Jumblat, and Jmail and Samir Ja'ja, but he lived as long as like 3
Bashir
generations.
before him.
Bashir, yes. So we've had this like successive, Do you think it's time that now that Hezbollah, which was the main defender of that system and the only group that could have transferred that system from one generation to the next, now that this is gone, do you think that we should also play at that, which is making sure that we completely destigmatize the idea or remove the idea that Lebanese politics is confined to these players? So there's sort of a There's sort of an idea that we were repeatedly told so much as Lebanese that we eventually believed it about who we are, is that we will never be able to produce anything outside of that system. So you either play within the system or be sidelined and set aside. I think now there's also an opportunity to kind of unlearn that idea about ourselves, or remove this stigma, is that we can make sure that there is politics. There's anybody in this country could who has merit could climb up to the highest position. You don't need to be completely associated with a certain bloodline or come from a certain privileged background in able to ascend to power. And I think this is long term even as important, not to say more because that would upset you, but as important as the security issue, I think.
No, I think it's more important.
Okay.
But I want to get there.
So you feel getting there has to pass through ensuring that Hezbollah is never again a problem, or any other group like Hezbollah.
If I understand your 50-year analogy, is that there's been that kind of problem for the last 50 years.
But Hezbollah hasn't been here for 50 years.
Exactly, and the Syrians were. And before that, the Palestinians were. So yeah, you're right.
So breaking free from the political class means also neutralizing Lebanon from the constant crises that keep us locked in.
Absolutely. That, to me, would be the measure of success once more. I want everything else to happen.
So that's the portal. But Roni, what if we succeed in doing that, which is, okay, neutralizing Lebanon, but somehow this network of interests finds a way to reinvent itself? Do you think that's possible?
It's yes, it is possible. And also, I think better people will be able to fight harder. And I think also prime ministers that are not so good at this issue will be allowed to do things that they're very good at. I think Nawaf Salam could be a fantastic prime minister if this issue was completely behind us. I also think Saad Hariri would have been better. And I think Fuad Senora would have been better. And I'll say this with a crazy, this is pure speculation, but I believe it. Even failures would have failed less. Hassan Diab would not be the most unimpressive prime minister. Tamam Salam would have probably done more rather than less. And Salim al-Hus wouldn't be identified or defined by his relationship to Syria. The less impressive people, I think, would have had less output. The more impressive would be attacked less. And then you just have what at the end of the day should be normal state of affairs. And majorities, minorities, opposition, coalition, strange people meeting together to determine policies that they can all agree to. Ta'if, if it's implemented all the way, decentralization that's meaningful, not just token, not just words, it's real. And and then we can talk about municipal elections that matter, not just cosmetic elections that come and go or that are thrown away. Yeah, that should be the next generation. But that's the whole point.
I will let us end this episode by each asking one semi-personal question about. And would you like to go first?
No, you go first.
I want to know, what is the one thing you are most proud of in something that you've done in the last, let's say, maybe 1 year, maybe 5 weeks, maybe the last 5 years, let's say.
You have to give me a bigger time, a defined time frame.
Defined time. Let's say since October 17. What is your single...
Since the protest, 2019.
Since 2000, what is your proudest output or contribution?
Taking what should have been just a hobby on the side of other things I was doing into what I think has become a reasonably respected platform. So having two
You're being
mics...
very modest.
Yeah, I'm proud of it. Now I can look back and say I'm proud of it.
But is there like, rather than like just major, like something small
in that
period? Or maybe we can narrow it down. Let's say since exactly 1 year ago. I don't know what I needed to look at my clock for that.
What I'm proud of in the last year is
what's something you're happy you did?
I can tell you something that I'm looking back now. I'm certain was the right decision. To speak truth and never shy away from that, even when it can cost you a lot of mental energy and physical stress too, and can actually sometimes end friendships on the way. It may even create new ones you're not interested in, but stick to the truth. because that's the winning strategy. And I think you may have said this to me recently. You work with the losing side, but it's the losing side that wins in the end. No,
because they have you.
No, because they're speaking.
And they have the truth. Yes,
I think so. And I'm now more and more confident that I said what I said about Hezbollah in the last year, the Palestinian cause being fought from here, and now looking back at anniversaries, how I feel about March 14 and how I feel about other things that have come and gone. Yeah, I'm pretty solid having supported this, knowing that it was true. Yeah, that's something.
You got to ask me something, but it can't be the same question.
Same damn question.
No.
Yes,
No,
it's the same one.
I said no. My prerequisite was you can't, because that's lazy and the answer is obvious. Come on.
Can you define a political position you took since October 17 that you've maybe changed your mind from? Something that you believed in 6 years ago that you don't necessarily believe today.
6 years ago, I was naive enough to believe that there's a certain moral high ground that some people had over other people. I used to believe that everything that was thawra, naively enough, was had the moral high ground. And then after meeting a lot of those people and realizing who they are and getting to know them, I realized that they are really no better. They're just a lot less powerful. And because they're on the outside and they don't have to make any actual decisions, it's easier for them to take any position they want. So I've realized that it's not black or white. It's nobody possesses the truth. Nobody possesses the truth as a whole. Not everybody is as smart as they may seem for their position. Yeah, I realized that people are not what I thought they were.
Yeah, that's, I think, been the journey of many on October 17
Yeah.
in the last 6 years.
Yeah.
And I think those that have seen a bit through it are probably going to be the ones involved later. Not for the bad reasons or the wrong reasons or anything like that, but because extremism doesn't work.
Extremism does not work, and you need to be very pragmatic in politics, and
Yeah.
you need to acknowledge that human beings always have a tendency to do bad things.
Pragmatic without letting go of principles.
Of course.
And then there's winners and losers, but I think that's the story right there. Thank you, George Wardini.
Thank you, Roni.